Welcome to Fireside Giants. My name is Alex with my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo. Today we're talking about the three biggest weaknesses for the New York Giants going into free agency and this offseason. In 2020, there was a bunch of weaknesses that we didn't expect. There was a bunch of units that played above expectations, especially on defense, but the Giants do still have some holes they need to fill. Of course, when you're looking at the first round pick, the 11th overall for the Giants this year, you're probably looking best player available, if not a trade back scenario. But that's kind of the major thing here is you usually go best player available when you're in the top 15, top 20 in the first round, even if you're in the first round in general. So the Giants, the later rounds, mid rounds is where they're really going to be plugging holes, but they have some pretty big ones and some really big deficiencies that they need to solve this offseason. And, that's kind of where their progress is going to come from, their momentum is going to come from heading into 2021. But before we dive into the three biggest weaknesses that the Giants do have currently on the roster, Anthony, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing quite well. I will give everybody the update, right? Because we mentioned this a couple episodes ago, my flag football season. How's it going? Well, we did get smacked in our first game. I think I mentioned that on a podcast, but I played really well at wide receiver. I think we had this discussion. I'll give everybody the update. I am going under a position change. Our quarterback broke his finger, so now I am the quarterback tonight. Wish me luck. This is going to be very interesting. I'll give you guys the update on how it goes. But looking ahead at the Giants, right? Offensive playmaker, kind of like my flag team. We're kind of missing that now that I'm not playing wide receiver. Now I don't know who I'm going to throw to. Who is Daniel Jones going to throw to? That's one of those big weaknesses, and there's a few on the Giants roster. They were close this year. They went 6-10. They almost made the playoffs, and really, Evan Engram doesn't drop a couple passes, they make the playoffs, right? But also at the same time, we won a few games on very close plays, right? The Seahawks game was very close. The Bengals game was very close. So we won a few close games. We lost a few close games. Realistically, we just are not ready yet to make the playoffs. So what we need to do is this offseason, we need to fix a couple of those weaknesses. I think the most important one to fix is the offensive playmaker, but you can make a strong case that the offensive line is more important. And that pass rush, the Giants had a really good pass rush last season, but do they have that top-tier edge rusher? No, of course they don't. We know that they don't. They were going pass rush by committee last season, and it worked for the most part. But there were times where, quarterbacks were standing in the pocket for a long time, and we were saying, where is the pass rush? That did happen last season. So really, overall, the Giants, they're close. They're getting there. They're building something, right? And they had a lot of injuries last year. Saquon Barkley was out for most of the year. Darius Slayton was hobbled for a lot of the season. Daniel Jones suffered with an injury for a little while. And even Andrew Thomas played through the whole season with a foot injury, right? So this is a team that has the pieces in place. For some reason, they're not putting it together, but getting a couple more pieces might help a couple of those other pieces put it together, right? So when we look ahead at this offseason and we identify these weaknesses, realistically, if the Giants do address these weaknesses properly and they really patch them up, I think there's a very good chance that the Giants could potentially slip it to the playoffs this year, maybe win the division. It's a weak division. I don't think it's going to get much stronger this year. I think it's going to be kind of weak again. The NFC least, it was historically bad last year. But, looking forward, I think the Giants are on the right track. They did make some mistakes over the past few years. 2018 was a year that we would like to forget a lot of the offseason moves that we made there. Going into the season with Eric Flowers as a starting tackle was just never going to be a good idea. That's number one thing that you can point out to. So they made some mistakes, but overall, I really feel like the way that this team is headed under the direction of Joe Judge, I'm feeling very positive about it. And once we discuss these weaknesses, maybe come up with some ways to patch up these weaknesses, I think that we could be looking at a Giants team that's much improved in 2021. And I really think you're looking ahead to 2022 and saying that is a playoff team.
Yeah, we need the upgrades. We need them now. But with the cap space kind of fluctuating between 180, 190, it's not settled just yet. It's going to be difficult for them to sign a lot of these players that we want them to in free agency. We talk about outside linebackers, we talk about receivers, we talk about Leonard Williams and Dalvin Tomlinson. Not going to be easy to get guys to plug these holes. They're going to have to use the draft in some way. But the number one biggest weakness, in my opinion, right now for the Giants going into the offseason is the offensive line still. It's still the offensive line. And, Dave Gettleman promised us, let's solve the offensive line once and for all. That's what he said, verbatim, what he told the fan base. That has not happened. That is supposed to be his specialty. He is the guy that in Carolina would find gems in the mid rounds, that would end up being starters and above average starters. Nick Gates was a really great find for him, an undrafted free agent out of Nebraska. But what happened to the rest of them? Shane Lemieux was one of the worst pass blockers, if not the worst pass blocker in the NFL last year. Matt Parrott, still undecided. He had COVID. I'm going to give him a pass for that. Cam Fleming was a disaster. Will Hernandez was replaced halfway through the season for the worst pass blocking guard in the NFL. And Kevin Zeitler had his worst season to date. And Andrew Thomas, of course, he struggled, but he was also injured. So this entire offensive line situation is still a problem. And now we're going into the third season. Actually, it's the fourth season under Gettleman, and we still haven't figured it out. This is a major issue. The Giants were ranked dead last, below the Jets, who had the worst offense arguably in history last year. They were ranked below the Jets in pass blocking efficiency. Their offensive line was an embarrassment. They were also ranked 23rd in run blocking. I don't know how. They had an average run. They had an average run attack. They were ranked about 16th, middle of the pack in running the ball last year. So they had the worst pass blocking, efficiency grade, and they had below average run blocking efficiency grade. And here we are saying, Dave Gettleman did this. Maybe he did this. Maybe he was the one who hired Joe Judge. Maybe he found a couple of good free agents. But the reality is now we still have to sit here and talk about how the offensive line needs more allocations. He's had 3 years to figure this out. Nate Solder was a bust. He didn't even play last year. Patrick Omame was a bust. Now we're just trying to supplement pieces. What are we doing here, man? What are we doing here? Where is this offensive line going? Because if it were me, I'm now looking at the second round and saying, maybe we have no choice but to spend that second round pick on an offensive tackle instead of a pass rusher or another offensive weapon. He still hasn't figured it out. We may have to spend our first round pick on an offensive tackle if Penei Sewell were to magically drop to us, or even Rashawn Slater. Now we have to make these decisions because we have no choice. Anthony, what do you think about the offensive line right now? What is Dave Gettleman's implication? I'm blaming him a lot for this. I'm blaming him a lot because this is the one thing he promises he would solve, and he hasn't done it. Maybe we saw some growth last year from the offensive line, but we were still ranking the bottom of the NFL, dead last in pass blocking efficiency. That is not enough. Daniel Jones was being forced to throw to his first read. He couldn't get off his progressions because he was so nervous. They were like, DJ, you don't have time to sit in the pocket. You don't have time to move. You don't have time to get through your progressions. You're going to have to stare down your first read and get the ball out. That's why we saw him do that so often. Now what? Now, where do we go from here? Where's the offensive line getting some support from?
So I will say this, we did see growth from the offensive line this past season. It was marginal growth. The Giants, had the worst blank pass rushing efficiency. I think you mentioned that, and it was bad, right? The Giants' offensive line is still bad. It's getting better, though, I believe. I truly do believe that. And I will say this much about Dave Gettleman and the offensive line. He has failed to build the offensive line that he promised to build and that we wanted to see, but he has tried. And he has taken chances on guys. They just haven't panned out. So it's like the strategy I don't disagree with. I don't disagree with offensive line in round 1, round 3, and round 5 last year. I don't disagree with that at all. I could say I disagree with the player that was selected in round 1. I wanted Jedrick Wills. I like Andrew Thomas. I see a really bright future for Jedrick Thomas. But Alex, you and I have this conversation all the time. Do you prefer to go for the high ceiling or the high floor? Andrew Thomas was the high floor prospect. To me, Tristan Wirfs and Jedrick Wills were the high ceiling prospects. Why did they have higher ceilings? Well, Jedrick Wills had a lower floor and a higher ceiling because he was the better prospect, better player in college, but he was playing right tackle and no one was sure how he was going to make the transition to left tackle. So that's where his low floor came in, right? That's why he was more boom or bust than Andrew Thomas. He made the transition to left tackle very, very well. He did a great job this season. I really like what Jedrick Wills did with the Browns. I really liked him in the pre-draft process. And then same thing with Tristan Wirfs. Everybody was saying he's very athletic, might have to move into guard, plays right tackle, not left tackle. So lower floor and higher ceiling, right? Because if he could put all that stuff together, he would be one of the best offensive tackles in the league. Well, hey, I think he was an all-pro this year, wasn't he, right? Tristan Wirfs, great player, great talent. So that's where we get into the nuance of this argument, right? And in terms of what Dave Gettleman has done on the offensive line, he has made the picks, but has he made the right picks? Matt Parrott, I really like Matt Parrott. I think there's a bright future in Matt Parrott. It remains to be seen. Shane Lemieux, a lot of Giants fans really like him. I'm not too crazy about Shane Lemieux. I think there's potential as a solid run blocker. What I've seen in pass protection has been like an abomination. It's been terrible, and he really needs to fix that. Now, let's also not let's not ignore the fact that they had a positional coaching change, right? Mark Colombo was fired. They brought in Dave DeGuglielmo, right? I always forget how to say his name. I'm sorry for that. But they brought him in, and let's not pretend like that's not, Dave Gettleman has some influence on what happens on the coaching staff, right? He has some influence, and so does Jason Garrett. Clearly had influence on that. Joe Judge has a lot of influence on that. That definitely hurt the offensive line's growth. You can't deny that. That became an issue in terms of growing and developing these younger players. You can argue that the Giants' offensive line played a lot better after they fired Mark Colombo, but at the same time, they still really weren't getting the job done. They weren't good enough, right? And that's what we need. We need them to at least be good enough. I think that if the Giants' offensive line, let's say the Giants theoretically do the things we expect them to do. They get a playmaker. They get a really nice wide receiver. Maybe even they, add a piece on the offensive line. Let's say they add these pieces. Well, we still need that coaching staff, and we still need to see that offensive line develop to be good enough, meaning league average or above at the very least, like just slightly above league average. That would be a huge step forward from where we were last year. So if we're league average this year, I think that would be incredible. I'd be really excited with that. But really, at the end of the day, if we don't get that out of this offensive line, if we don't get that out of this unit, don't get league average, we don't get slightly above, then all that other stuff that we're doing, trying to get all these playmakers, if we do add all these playmakers, it's going to be a moot point. It's going to be all for naught. They're not even going to get the ball because Daniel Jones isn't going to have enough time. Saquon Barkley is not going to have the comeback season that we think he can because he's not going to have the lanes in, the run blocking game. So all that ties in together. The offensive line, winning starts in the trenches. The Giants should know that better than anybody. Look at the 2007-2008 championship game, right? When we beat the undefeated Patriots. Well, the offensive line was really good back then, and the defensive line was even better. Winning starts in the trenches. The Giants' defensive line is good if they're able to retain those players. The offensive line is not, and it held this team back. We had 17.5 points per game last year. Completely unacceptable, especially in today's NFL, and really in most days' NFL. 17.5 points per game has not been cutting it for a long time. So it's time for the Giants to really just address this offensive line, address it in free agency, the draft, whatever, get the right coaches in place, develop this team. They did hire a new offensive line coach. I'm forgetting his name. I'm drawing a blank. I really like him, though.
Robert Sale.
Yeah, I read about him. I really like what I read about him. I think that he's really good. He has offensive coordinator experience as well, so he can really do a lot of things. And maybe, potentially, we could be looking at him as a replacement for Jason Garrett if Jason Garrett gets fired at the end of the year for offensive coordinator. So I really like that hiring because there was future implications that were really strong with it as well. So I like that hiring. I'm really hopeful that he can turn things around. We really need him to. But again, there's a lot of nice interior offensive linemen in the middle rounds of this draft, a couple offensive tackles as well. I think that the Giants are going to have to take one within the first 3 rounds.
Yep, that's kind of where I'm going with this. That we are still in this situation. The offensive line remains a problem. I do like the Robert Sale hire. I think that was a Joe Judge hire, which makes me excited because Jason Garrett was not a Joe Judge hire. That was a John Mara hire, and we saw the difference between Patrick Graham and Jason Garrett last year. We expected the offense to be a lot better than the defense. Ended up being reversed 100 times over. The defense played well above their pay grade, and the offense played well below. So that is kind of the difference in coaching, and I think that moving forward, the offensive line needs to be something that is prioritized even further because, Dave Gettleman's a big proponent of building through the trenches. We know this. The hog mollies, we know the hog molly. That is his word, his phrase that he's literally brought to New York, and meanwhile, we have the worst offensive line in the NFL in pass blocking. All he talks about is, we want big guys in the trenches. They're going to punch you in the nose. They're going to dominate. They're going to move the mountain. They're going to move interior defenders. They don't do that. That is not what's been happening here. We have been watching one of the worst offensive lines year in and year out for the last 7 years, and with very, very, very little change. Now we have some youth. We have Shane Lemieux. We got Andrew Thomas. We got Nick Gates. Zeitler is the only person that I actually trust on the offensive line right now, and then Matt Parrott, Cam Fleming at right tackle, still don't trust those guys. But I don't really understand the concept of people really want to cut Kevin Zeitler. Let's find out how good our offensive line is then after we cut Kevin Zeitler. You want to see a mess? You want to see Daniel Jones wasting the next 2 years of his career? Cut Kevin Zeitler. I promise you will watch Daniel Jones get absolutely mauled for the next 2 years. Because I promise you, Cutting Kevin Zeitler is not a solution to fixing the worst pass blocking line in the NFL. And people will say, well, he was part of it. He was part of the worst pass blocking offensive line in the NFL. Yes, he was. But there are 4 other players that played way worse than him. He's not playing left tackle and left guard and center and right tackle. There is not one person on the offensive line that can manage the positions that he's not playing. He can't do it for everybody. Extend Kevin Zeitler another year, bring his cap hit down. He's the only person I trust in the line right now, the only person showing some sort of stability and continuity. Do not cut him because you want to save cap space. After you cut Nate Solder, we're going to have barely any money invested in the offensive line. That's unacceptable. You need to have a lot of money invested in the offensive line because when you don't, you have the worst pass blocking in the NFL. That is what happens. Right now we have youth. It could take 3 years for these guys to hit their stride, to hit their prime. We're not working with a Tristan Wirfs here or a Jedrick Wills, who Anthony and I both were talking about a lot over Andrew Thomas before the draft. These guys were more polished, they had higher ceilings, but Andrew Thomas had the higher floor. That they traded conservatism for just a higher chance of getting a higher quality player, and they ended up losing out on that one. So far, we don't know what Andrew Thomas. He could end up blowing all of them out of the water at the end of the day. It's still yet to be determined. But the reality is we need to be focusing on that. Getting rid of our best guy is not a solution. That is a problem. That is going to hurt us even more. And a second-round pick, this is a deep offensive tackle class. I would be more than fine spending a second-round pick on an offensive tackle. And then having him compete at right tackle with Matt Parrott. Get rid of Cam Fleming. Goodbye. You don't need him. Or save him for a depth piece maybe. Have Matt Parrott in a second-rounder, battle it out at right tackle, and develop those guys and see what you can do.
Cam Fleming is also a free agent right now, and I really doubt that they re-sign him. But in terms of the second round, I actually want them to go not necessarily offensive tackle because I do believe in Matt Parrott. I'm pretty confident in Matt Parrott. I would prefer they go interior offensive line. I look at guys like Creed Humphrey out of Oklahoma is probably the best center in the draft. I'm a Nick Gates guy. I'm a huge Nick Gates fan, but Dave Gettleman did say he's not afraid to draft talent over talent, right? He said he's not afraid to draft over players, right
now. That's not what we need. Left guard or right tackles, in my opinion.
I think you're sleeping on Creed Humphrey. I don't think tackle is that important.
Fine.
I think that
you're looking at center.
Wyatt Davis. Center Creed Humphrey. I think you're sleeping on him. He's a pretty good player. And I like Nick Gates a lot, but maybe one of them can move to guard. We can figure that out. That's why Dave Gettleman, when he said he's not afraid to draft over players, I actually agreed with that. I actually did like that. It's one of the only Dave Gettleman quotes that I'm a fan of. Right?
I think
Wyatt Davis out of Ohio
State. Have
State.
a ton of players already. I feel like you should do that when you have established starters. Then you can compete.
You don't really.
Right now we have so many holes.
Right. I mean. I disagree. I don't think that you would be drafting players over established starters. I think you would be drafting players over fringe starters like Nick Gates, who really hasn't established himself yet. So you would maybe take the chance on a guy who could be better, right? Maybe, potentially.
Yeah, but I would argue. Nick Gates might. Before
I'm really not trying to get into a Nick Gates debate. I'm really trying to say I like Nick Gates. I'm just saying second round, Wyatt Davis out of Ohio State is an offensive guard that I really like. Looking further down the list,
I would argue
Landon Dickerson out of Alabama and Josh Myers again out of Ohio State. There's a few really nice options. Second round, I would really like to see them go offensive guard, interior offensive line.
In context, I'm just looking at who the Giants need more, a center or a left guard. It's going to be left guard for me. I assume it is going to be for you too.
Of course, but
that's the question.
You don't want to just draft for need. If Creed Humphrey is there and you think he can be one of the best centers in the NFL, you take him, right?
That's fair. I mean, if you think Nick Gates can move, which we know he can, to left guard, I don't know. We know he can do right guard and right tackle. Maybe move back to right tackle.
Well, he played right guard at the end of the 2019 season. He played it pretty well. He played right tackle, then moved into right guard when Kevin Zeitler got hurt, and he had his best games at right guard. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Although I would like to keep him at center. I think he's got a really bright future at center. Just keep this in mind. Whatever. That's my spiel on that. But there's a lot of interior offensive linemen in the second, third round that I think the Giants really should consider. Actually, shouldn't even consider. They should take a chance on one of those prospects.
I agree. I think taking a chance on an interior guy or a tackle is a necessity. We're like we've just mentioned for the last 10, 15 minutes. Offensive line's a mess. We need to upgrade that as soon as possible. Draft capital still needs to be allocated, which is really pissing me off because Dave Gettleman promised us he would fix this a year ago, 2 years ago now. That was the first thing he said. We're going to get hog mollies. We're going to build through the trenches. He's gotten the defensive line done. Now they're all hitting free agency. Who knows if they can retain him? This is becoming a problem really quickly. It's been a problem. It hasn't gone away. That is something I'm going to blame on him. That is something he promised us and he did not deliver. So among many other things, as you can tell, I'm not the biggest Dave Gettleman fan. I give him credit for last free agency signings. I give him credit for the last draft class that has proven some of those guys have proven to be productive. No, we don't know their long-term future yet. But offensive line's a position, a unit, really, that has not looked sharp as of yet. And I'm not really optimistic he's going to solve that this season or if he ever will with the Giants. But moving on to the next weakness, I do want to move on and talk about another big one, and that is offensive playmaker. We've talked about a ton of wide receivers ranging from Corey Davis to Kenny Golladay to Allen Robinson to Curtis Samuel. We've broken down all of them. We know who we think the Giants would do well with, and who might be more cost efficient than others. Allen Robinson's likely going to be tagged. Kenny Golladay likely going to be tagged. They're saying they're going to want a second-round pick for him. That's a debate for another day. Anthony, we'll do that. We'll do another video on that entirely if we think that Kenny Golladay should be traded for a second-round pick. I think that's interesting. But for now, we've talked about him.
Interesting debate. We will definitely have to have that discussion.
We'll go through that. Curtis Samuel, we did a whole video on him. I loved Curtis Samuel when we looked through him even in a more in-depth scenario. He's a really interesting player, really, really cool gadget player that would do well with some creative play calling. He has Joe Brady in Carolina. That's why he excelled last year. But I don't know if Jason Garrett can do that. I don't know if he can utilize a guy like that to his maximum potential. So that's another question we have. And then you have Kyle Pitts at 11. You have Jalen Waddle. You have Devonta Smith, a bunch of guys who could fall the Giants could take. But I think behind offensive line, even if you give Daniel Jones tons of time in the pocket, if he has nobody creating separation, if he has nobody getting open, it doesn't matter anyway. Who cares if the offensive line is doing well if he doesn't have a Tyreek Hill or a Keenan Allen or a DeAndre Hopkins? It doesn't matter. So, Anthony, what's the importance of an offensive playmaker, and why do you think, would you slot it in at second behind offensive line as a more thing, or would you say the pass rush is even more of a weakness?
I think it's kind of difficult to, rank these, right? I think the pass rush is definitely the least weak area out of these three things that we're discussing. I think that the offensive playmaker and the offensive line, it's which one is number one to you. The offensive line has been really bad, but you know what? The Giants do need playmakers. They do need help. Daniel Jones has not really had a consistent target that he can really rely on. They tried to make Evan Engram that consistent target, and he dropped 11 passes this season, and he was responsible for about 7 or 8 turnovers. That's not good. That's really, really bad, right? He doesn't have that consistent playmaker. Saquon Barkley would have been that, but he's been hurt the past 2 years. He's been hurt a lot, and the torn ACL is real tragedy. I hope that he's, recovering well, and I hope that he's going to be ready to play at the start of the season, and it seems like he will be able to. The Giants really need him. Daniel Jones really needs him. He needs some pressure taken off of his shoulders, and that is undeniable. He absolutely needs that. So when you look at the Giants' offensive playmakers, you look at guys like Sterling Shepard is your best playmaker. Now, do you think Sterling Shepard should be your best playmaker? He shouldn't be. The Giants didn't draft him to be their best playmaker when they drafted him. They drafted him to be their second or third best playmaker when they drafted him, right? They already had Odell Beckham Jr. on the roster. They said Sterling Shepard would be a perfect complementary piece, and he was perfectly complementary to Odell Beckham Jr. Now, I look at some of these wide receivers in the draft that could potentially fall to number 11. And I say these guys are true number 1 wide receivers that could have the impact on the Giants offense similar to the one that Odell Beckham Jr. did. And then we could see Sterling Shepard be that perfect complementary piece once again in his career. And I think that would be really beneficial for Daniel Jones. The Giants aren't going to put up more than 17.5 points unless they have better playmakers. We had opportunities to score that were dropped. We had opportunities to score that were sacks, the offensive line, but not always the offensive line's fault. Yes, the offensive line was terrible. The pass protection was abysmal. But the wide receivers also failed to create separation a lot of the times, forcing Daniel Jones to hold on to the ball, forcing him to take sacks, forcing him to throw errant passes to try and fit them into a tight window. That stuff happened because the offensive playmakers just were not doing their job to the highest capability. They were not meeting that threshold of talent that the Giants need in order to be a playoff team. You look at those teams that made it deep into the playoffs. You look at the 2 teams that made it to the Super Bowl, the Kansas City Chiefs. Can we say enough about the offensive weapons that they have? Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, of course, Patrick Mahomes is his own offensive playmaker, right? They made it there with a crippled offensive line. They didn't win because of that offensive line, but they did make it to the Super Bowl. They had so many offensive playmakers. Sammy Watkins, Demarcus Robinson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he was injured, but he came back. Like, they have a lot of playmakers. And then you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They just won. Of course, Tom Brady's his own playmaker, but outside of him, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Scotty Miller, Rob Gronkowski, they have a lot of playmakers. The Giants don't have any of those playmakers that match up like that. They really do not. So they are going to have to address that this offseason, whether it's through free agency, whether it's through the draft. We've been hitting this drum for a minute now. We've been hitting it for months now. The Giants have to address this. It's a tough debate. You can say that that's their biggest weakness. You could say the offensive line is. Either way, I won't argue with you. I'll just agree. They're both terrible weaknesses for the Giants, and this offense is not going to get going until those two weaknesses are patched up and solved.
Yep, I agree. That is the catalyst. You mentioned it before, 17.5 points per game. One of the worst passing attacks in the NFL. One of the average running attack really would salvage any sense of mediocrity. This is the opportunity. The first round, 11th overall pick. You can go and find a premier playmaker there. You could trade back and still land Rashad Bateman. There's a bunch of things the Giants can do. There is no excuse to walk away from this offseason without finding a premium player, an asset that they can actually build an offense around alongside Saquon Barkley. But before we dive into the last weakness, I just read online that Tiger Woods was in a car crash, so I just wanted to address that really quickly. Apparently a single car crash. Prayers up to Tiger. Hopefully he's okay. The picture didn't look altogether that great. The car was on its side. Go check it out on Twitter. But after Kobe, I'm traumatized already from all these things. I don't think I could take another one of these major influential people going down like this. So, prayers up to Kobe. Really him too and his family. But prayers up to Tiger Woods. Make sure, just sending out some prayer for him. Light a candle, whatever it might be. I know his injuries are unknown at the time, but, just wanted to mention it in the video just out of respect for him and all that he's accomplished. So,
yeah, and I'll say, of course, by the time this video is live on YouTube or wherever, we'll know what his injuries are. We'll know by then. But right now, as we're recording this, we don't know. I'm aware of the situation as well, Alex, and prayers up to Tiger, his family, and all of his fans. That this is scary for all of us. Fans of sports in general. This is one of the greatest athletes of all time. So prayers up to him. I pray that when we are watching this video tomorrow, that it's more
better
of a false alarm. Better news. I really, that's what I pray. So prayers up. Terrible news, and hopefully we get good news soon.
Yeah, screw this year, screw last year. I'm ready to move on from all this crap.
Yeah, lost a lot of influential people. MF Doom, that one flew under the radar. He was a great rapper. A lot of
Nipsey
influential
Hussle,
people. Nipsey Hussle as well. There's been a lot of loss. So and I'm sure a lot of people listening lost people in their personal life as well. So our hearts go out to you as well. It's been a difficult couple of years, and just prayers up for all of you, and just know that we here at Fireside Giants and Empire Sports Media are with you.
Yep, we are here. We are trying to make content for you guys to, brighten your days up a little bit more. Try and get us through this quarantine process as we've been doing for a while now. I hope, you enjoy these videos and content because, it takes a lot of time and effort, and you just want to do this for you guys. So you have a platform to enjoy your team and a community that we're building so we can really do it together. So as always, to the next topic, deviating away a little bit. More weaknesses. How much fun. Pass rush. We lost Lorenzo Carter, O'Shea Jimenez last year. O'Shea Jimenez with a shoulder injury. Lorenzo Carter with torn Achilles against Dallas. They're the primary guys. I'm under the impression that the Giants might try and roll with him again in 2021. They don't have the money to go out and sign a premier outside linebacker. We've talked about Hassan Reddick. We've talked about Leonard Floyd. We've talked about even, Carl Lawson, that's, an edge rusher. I don't really think he fits our scheme, but you never know. There's a bunch of guys that are hitting the free agency market. Jadeveon Clowney, we've talked about him. But the reality is the Giants don't have the money, and that's going to be the thing that we talk about all season. They don't have the freaking money, and we can't solve every position. They're going to have to roll with what they've got. So Lorenzo Carter will likely be back. O'Shea Jimenez will likely be back. I think we're going to end up rolling with those two again. But again, this is a position that was a problem last year. We had 7th round pick Carter Coughlin. We had practice squatter Jabal Shared earning a majority of snaps. What are we supposed to expect from them? Not much. I didn't expect much. They actually performed better than I thought they would. So that was a pretty big indication of how much Patrick Graham got out of these guys, and how he is coaching these players up to play above their level of actual quality. So, moving forward, we cannot rely on guys like that. We are going to eventually be phased out. We're going to be dominated by better offenses. We saw it against Cleveland. They steamrolled us with no problem. Baltimore steamrolled us with no problem. We need a pass rush. The Giants had 40-plus sacks last year, but it was thanks to their interior defense and Patrick Graham just drawing up some of the most creative blitz packages I've seen in a while. And getting outside linebackers back, Carter and Ximenez will provide a nice boost, but we could use a better player. Maybe even spending a third-round pick on an edge rusher might be a solution. Anthony, what are you thinking about this unit? How do you think they solve it, or do you think they roll with the same players?
So I'm actually going to say that I somewhat disagree, okay? I don't think that spending another third-round pick on a pass rusher is the solution. The Giants have done that a few times. They've done that with Lorenzo Carter, they've done it with O'Shane Ximenez, and then they've done it a few times in the later rounds trying to find this pass rusher. Sooner or later, if the Giants are serious about getting their edge rusher, they're going to have to stop shying away from making a serious investment. They're going to have to do it. If they are serious about getting an edge rusher, they're going to have to take one in the first or second round or sign one in free agency who's legitimate. These third-round picks, taking chances on them, if you just continue to take chances, yeah, maybe one day you'll hit, but odds are you probably won't. You're just going to get more rotational pieces like Lorenzo Carter and O'Shane Ximenez. And Lorenzo Carter, I'll give him credit. He started to develop into a guy that was more than just a rotational piece. He started to develop into a quality starter, and then he had that injury, which is super, super unfortunate. I love Lorenzo Carter as a player, and as a person, he's a cool guy too. He's, and I really hope that he recovers, comes back, has a great comeback season. So, in terms of the pass rush, though, I think that the Giants' pass rush, I'm not going to say it was a weakness last year. I think the Giants, they got a lot of sacks. I think they generated a lot of pressure through the scheme, through blitzes, and through the interior. I think they have their pass rusher on the roster, well, they will if they re-sign him. Leonard Williams, I think, is their pass rusher. So I don't want to say that the pass rusher or the pass rush is the weakness. Me personally, I'm going to say the edge rusher is the weakness. They don't have that edge presence. They have a lot of interior pressure and they have a lot of creative blitzes that generate pressure, but they don't have a consistent guy who stands up over the tackle and beats him down play after play. They don't have that, and I think that they need that. I think that eventually the Giants are going to have to make a serious investment. I don't know if this is the year to do it. I'm not crazy about the top of this year's edge class and everything in between, so I think eventually they are going to have to make that investment. I don't know if this is the time to do it, but yeah, eventually they will, and so I guess we'll agree, but we'll disagree. Pass rush is a need, but for me, edge rush is a need. I like the interior pass rush. I like the scheme and all that stuff in general.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the interior pass rush is just fine. It's the edge presence being to contain the edge against the run specifically. We saw teams utilize that outside zone sweeping motions to try and avoid those interior defensive linemen. They did it really well. The Ravens specifically, I remember seeing them running outside the tackles and just trying to attack our edge rushers really and our outside linebackers because they knew that we couldn't stop them once they got outside the interior defenders if they could contain them in the middle. So, that is a priority. I think the Giants know that. They got beat pretty badly by the rush at the end of the year. They still managed to be a top 10 unit in the category. For the last couple of games, they got steamrolled by, J.K. Dobbins, Nick Chubb, and, Kareem Hunt. Pretty tough opponents there. So I want to see some improvement there. I'd like to see them address that at least some way, one way or another. But it's totally possible they don't. They just roll with O'Shane Ximenez and Lorenzo Carter again and hope for the best coming off 2 significant injuries. So those are the 3 weaknesses, the biggest ones at least for the Giants, offensive line, offensive playmaker, and pass rush. I assume you guys will agree. Let us know in the comments below what you think the biggest weaknesses are. Rank your top 3. Maybe CB2 is on there. That's one that I think deserves an honorable mention. But as always, guys, thank you so much for tuning into Fireside Giants. I hope you enjoyed this video and the rest of the content that we have been producing. Some big stuff in the near future. Now, Anthony is about to hook us up with his prized possession prospect, Alim McNeil. He's coming on the podcast, guys. He's going to do an interview with us, break down some of his film, maybe.
I didn't know we were going to give out the big reveal in this one. Yeah, so Thank you to the people who retweeted my tweet and liked it. I think Philip Santana is one name that I remember specifically. Shout out to you. Shout out to everybody who did that, because I did tweet out, what do I got to do to get Aleem McNeil on the podcast? And then he messaged me on Twitter and said, I want to come on the podcast. So shout out to you fans. You're amazing. I love all of you, each and every single one of you, even the ones that hop onto the comment section and make fun of me and say that I'm picking my nose when I'm not. I'm just scratching it. Shout out to you. Shout out to all of you. And shout out to Aleem McNeil. I'm very excited for this. I'm really looking forward to getting this interview and podcast session done with him. And when we have more details on it and we know when it's going to happen, we will let you all know. Can't wait to do it. And hopefully this is the first of many prospects to join the podcast.
Absolutely, guys. So don't forget to subscribe below. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and Spotify and everything in between. Much love as always. We will catch you guys on the next episode.